In the first quarter of 2026, OpenAI reported revenue that nearly tripled year over year, and the company still posted a net loss of more than $21 billion in 3 months. That number tells you something important.
OpenAI CFO is worried about paying future compute bills.
Have been filed against the tech giant OpenAI, claiming their clients have been driven into delusional states, at times resulting in suicide.
Investors were not reacting to whether OpenAI could grow. They were reacting to whether growth would ever catch up to the bill. Because buried in that quarter was a much bigger story. OpenAI is spending faster than almost any company in the history of venture capital.
A company with $13 billion in revenues make $1.4 trillion.
All while the partner that built its entire infrastructure has quietly stopped needing it to be exclusive, and the rival it once dismissed as an afterthought has started beating it at its own game.
This has absolutely been a trend for OpenAI. Bulk of its co-founders are now gone. You have names like Ilya Sutskever, co-founder, left earlier this year. John Schulman and Jan Leke went over to rival Anthropic. Greg Brockman, one of the founders.
Let us go back to 2019, when Microsoft made its first major investment in OpenAI.
Deal and pact between Microsoft and OpenAI. It's a new stake in OpenAI's PBC.
Over the years that followed, Microsoft poured in roughly $13 billion and structured the deal around a strange and very specific idea. The agreement contained a clause that said if OpenAI ever achieved something called artificial general intelligence, Microsoft would lose its access to the technology entirely. Nobody could agree on what that term actually meant. There was no measurable threshold and no neutral judge. It was a philosophical concept sitting inside a commercial contract. And for years, it gave OpenAI enormous leverage, because Microsoft had to keep OpenAI happy or risk losing everything the moment a board vote decided the future had arrived. Then the leverage started running out, but not in the direction anyone expected. OpenAI began signing infrastructure deals everywhere. A massive partnership with Oracle, a deal with the cloud computing company CoreWeave. Then, in February 2026, Amazon announced a $50 billion investment of its own. On April 27th, 2026, Microsoft and OpenAI rewrote their entire relationship. The artificial general intelligence clause was deleted entirely. The exclusivity was dropped. Within 24 hours, OpenAI models were live on the cloud platform belonging to Amazon, a company Microsoft has spent 2 decades trying to beat. Microsoft kept a capped revenue share and its seat at the table, and it kept the right to see OpenAI ship its newest products first. But the thing that made the partnership feel like a marriage was gone. One financial writer summed up what was left in a single word: a situationship. Here is the part that should worry anyone watching the balance sheet, because none of this restructuring solved the actual problem, which is that OpenAI loses an enormous amount of money every single quarter. According to audited financial statements reported by The Information, the net loss at OpenAI for the full year, 2025, came to roughly $39 billion, after the company spent about $34 billion against revenue far short of that. A significant portion of that loss came from one-time accounting charges tied to the conversion of the company from a non-profit structure to a for-profit one. Even stripping those charges out, the underlying loss for the year still came to about $8 billion. Internal projections obtained by reporters showed the company expected losses to climb to $14 billion in 2026 on a non-cash adjusted basis, with cumulative losses reaching as high as $115 billion before the company turns cash flow, positive sometime around 2029 or 2030. Then the first quarter of 2026 actually arrived, and the real number ran even hotter than the projection. Revenue came in at $5.7 billion for the quarter, which is genuinely impressive growth, but the company burned through $3.7 billion in cash to generate it, and posted an operating loss of $9.3 billion. The headline net loss for the quarter, $21.3 billion, included roughly $12.4 billion in a non-cash charge tied to revaluing investor rights. Strip that single charge out, and the company was still losing money at a pace that would alarm almost any other industry. OpenAI was burning through more than 60% of every dollar of revenue it brought in, just to keep the lights on. The company finished the quarter holding more than $73 billion in cash, mostly thanks to a massive funding round earlier in the year, so survival was never the near-term question. The question was whether the spending would ever bend toward profit for the company, and right now the trend line says no. While all of this was happening, OpenAI tried to win the consumer video market and lost spectacularly. In September 2025, the company launched Sora as a standalone app, an AI video generation tool built around a TikTok-style feed, with enormous fanfare. Within 72 hours, it hit #1 on the United States App Store. Then it ran straight into a problem nobody inside the company seemed to have fully planned for. Users began generating videos using copyrighted characters and the likenesses of real public figures without consent, and within days the platform was also flooded with anti-Semitic content that moderators struggled to contain. Sam Altman later admitted publicly that the company had not expected how strongly people would react. OpenAI had also been negotiating a major partnership with Disney, announced in December 2025, that would have licensed more than 200 Disney, Marvel, Pixar, and Star Wars characters for use inside the app, alongside a planned $1 billion equity investment from Disney into OpenAI. Then, on March 24th, 2026, just 6 months after the big launch of Sora, OpenAI announced it was shutting the entire product down. The app, the developer access, the video features inside ChatGPT, all gone. According to multiple reports, Disney learned about the shutdown less than an hour before the public announcement, and the planned investment and licensing deal collapsed in that same hour. To be precise about what was actually lost, no formal agreement had been signed and no money had changed hands. So this was a deal that evaporated rather than one that had to be unwound. But the symbolism was brutal regardless. One of the most recognizable entertainment companies on earth had agreed in principle to bet $1 billion on the consumer video ambitions of OpenAI, and within 3 months, those ambitions no longer existed. Altman said afterward that killing Sora felt terrible, and that the company needed to concentrate its compute and its engineering attention on coding tools and autonomous agents instead, where the real enterprise money actually was. That pivot reveals the deeper problem, because the market OpenAI is now racing to defend is the exact market it used to dominate without a fight. According to research from the venture capital firm Menlo Ventures, OpenAI controlled roughly 50% of enterprise spending on AI language models back in 2023. By the end of 2025, that share had fallen to 27%, while the share held by Anthropic had grown from 24% to 40% over the same stretch. The damage was even more lopsided in coding specifically, where enterprise spending on AI coding tools makes up the largest single category of business AI usage. The share of that coding segment held by Anthropic grew from 42% in the middle of 2025 to 54% by the end of the year, more than double the 21% held by OpenAI's. A separate dataset from the corporate finance platform Ramp, which tracks spending across tens of thousands of American businesses, found that the overall share of business adoption held by Anthropic passed the share held by OpenAI for the first time in April 2026, 34.4% to 32.3%. Anthropic had quadrupled its adoption over the previous year. OpenAI grew by less than 1 percentage point. Then came the valuation crossover. On May 28, 2026, Anthropic closed a $65 billion funding round at a valuation of $965 billion, surpassing the $852 billion valuation OpenAI had set in its own funding round just 2 months earlier. For the first time since its founding, OpenAI was no longer the most valuable AI lab in the world. The company that had overtaken it was started in 2021 by a small group of former OpenAI employees, including 2 of its own co-founders, who reportedly left specifically because they had concerns about how the safety-conscious culture inside OpenAI was eroding under commercial pressure. 5 years later, the company born out of that disagreement was worth more than the one its founders had walked away from. And it was not just the valuation that walked out the door, it was the people. Across 2025 and into 2026, OpenAI lost a remarkable list of senior leadership. Co-founder and chief scientist Ilya Sutskever, who later started his own research lab. Chief technology officer Mira Marathi, who went on to found a new company called Thinking Machines Lab. Chief research officer Bob McGrew. Co-founder John Schulman, who left for Anthropic directly. Several researchers who had personally built core pieces of the architecture behind ChatGPT eventually followed Marathi to her new venture, while others went to Anthropic or to the newly formed superintelligence lab at Meta. According to the venture capital firm Signalfire and its 2025 State of Talent report, which analysed hiring data across the industry, engineers at OpenAI were roughly 8 times more likely to leave for Anthropic than the reverse. The same report found a 2-year employee retention rate at OpenAI of 67%, trailing both Anthropic at 80% and Google DeepMind at 78%. People who had spent years building the most famous AI product in the world were choosing, in large and visible numbers, to go build something else somewhere else, and the destination was almost always the same rival. Now OpenAI is heading toward a public stock offering, carrying nearly all of these problems into full public view. On June 8th, 2026, the company confidentially filed paperwork with the Securities and Exchange Commission for an initial public offering, just 1 week after Anthropic filed its own paperwork for the same thing. The public statement from OpenAI acknowledged the filing almost sheepishly, saying the company expected the news to leak, so it decided to simply announce it first. Analysts expect a public listing, likely sometime between September and November of this year, to value the company north of $1 trillion. That price assumes investors are willing to buy into a business that loses more than half of every dollar it brings in, whose internal projections show the cash burn roughly doubling again in 2027, and whose own underwriters will have to explain why a company facing this kind of structural loss deserves a valuation usually reserved for companies that are profitable many times over. OpenAI built the product that introduced the entire world to generative AI. It still has more than 900 million weekly users, and a brand name that has effectively become a synonym for the technology itself. But brand recognition is not the same thing as a moat, and right now the moat is the thing nearly everyone on the outside has started to question out loud. The company spent more money, moved faster, and had a longer head start than anyone else in this industry has ever had, and it is now heading into public markets while watching its most important corporate partnership lose its exclusivity, its most dangerous competitor pull ahead in valuation and in the actual market it used to own, and its own people walk out the door toward that same competitor in numbers. Nobody inside the company can spin away. The question was never whether OpenAI could spend its way to dominance. It already proved it could do that. The real question was whether the spending would ever be enough to keep that dominance once it had it. And right now, the people who understand the company best, the engineers who built it from the inside, are answering that question with their feet. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, leave a like, drop a comment with your take, and subscribe for more of these. It really does help the channel.